On the 10th of October 1969, a young man in Michigan was driving to a radio station. A late-night program was on air, taking calls about a rumor that had been spreading for weeks. He wanted to be part of it. He wanted to say his piece. He never arrived. A drunk driver came over a hill at 80 miles an hour, and the two cars met, and he was killed instantly. The rumor he was driving to discuss was that Paul McCartney had died in a car crash. The presenter that night said something afterwards that has stayed with me. He said he died instantly listening to my radio program. On his next broadcast, he opened with a Bob Dylan song, and he refused to play the Beatles at all. Paul McCartney was alive. He is alive now. He was alive that whole time, in England, with his family, entirely unaware that a young man had just died on a Michigan road because of a story about him. That is where this begins. This is about three men, Paul McCartney, Elvis Presley, and Tupac Shakur, and the theories that refuse to let them go. One of them is still with us. Two of them are not. And the striking thing is not that people believe these stories. It is that all three stories are the same story, told three times, following a template that was written in the autumn of 1969 and has never really been improved on since. I am not going to try to convince you the theories are false. They are false, and I will show you why. What I am interested in is the harder question underneath. Why do we do this? Why, when someone enormous dies, does a portion of us decide that they did not? Start with the claim itself, because it is stranger than most people remember. The theory does not say Paul McCartney is hiding. It says he died on the 9th of November 1966 in a car accident after leaving a recording session. It says the remaining Beatles, facing the collapse of the biggest act in the world, found a look-alike, had him surgically altered, poached him, and installed him in Paul's place. And then, according to the theory, they felt so guilty about the deception that they spent the next 3 years hiding confessions in their own records, in the artwork, in the lyrics, in sounds played backwards. So the theory is not just that a man died, it is that 4 of the most photographed people alive ran a flawless conspiracy and simultaneously could not stop leaving clues about it. Hold that contradiction. It matters later. Now, how it actually started, because the origin is documented, and it is not mysterious at all. On the 17th of September, 1969, a student named Tim Harper published an article in the newspaper of Drake University in Iowa. It asked whether Paul McCartney was dead. For about a month, it did what campus rumors did in 1969. It moved by word of mouth, through the underground, slowly. Then, on the 12th of October, a Detroit disc jockey named Russ Gibb was on air at WKNR when he took a call. The caller told him Paul had died in 1966 and been replaced, and the caller told him to do something specific, play Revolution 9 backwards. Gibb did it on air, and out of the tape loop came a phrase that sounded, to a lot of people listening, unmistakably like, "Turn me on, dead man." 2 days later, on the 14th of October, a University of Michigan student named Fred Labor wrote it up for the Michigan Daily. He framed it as a review of the new Beatles album, Abbey Road, and he laid out the evidence. Here is the part that people leave out. Labor was not a believer. He has said since that he was writing satire. He invented some of the clues himself, for effect, because it was funny. It did not read as funny, it read as a dossier. That article is the moment the thing stops being a campus rumor and becomes a worldwide phenomenon. Within weeks, it was on radio stations across America, then across the world, and the clues, including the ones a student had made up as a joke, became canon. So let us look at the evidence, because I think it is genuinely worth understanding why it was so persuasive. The Abbey Road cover, 4 men crossing a road. In the reading, it is a funeral procession. John Lennon in white, preacher, Ringo Starr in black, the Undertaker, George Harrison in denim, the gravedigger, and Paul, barefoot, out of step with the others, holding a cigarette in the wrong hand, the corpse. Parked at the roadside is a Volkswagen with a number plate reading 28 IF 28 if Paul would have been 28 if he had lived. On the Sgt. Pepper cover, believers pointed to a patch on his sleeve that they read as OPD, officially pronounced dead. Play certain tracks backwards, and you hear phrases. Slow certain passages, and you hear a voice. Every one of these has an ordinary explanation. The barefoot photograph was taken on a hot August morning, and Paul had simply kicked off his sandals between takes. The Volkswagen belonged to someone who lived in the street. The patch reads OPP, Ontario Provincial Police, a gift from a Canadian tour, and a backwards tape loop will produce recognizable words to almost anyone listening for them, because that is what human hearing does with noise, which is the actual explanation for the entire thing, and it has a name. Our brains are pattern-finding machines, and they do not have an off switch. Show a person random noise and tell them a face is hidden in it, and they will find a face. Play them a sound backwards and suggest a phrase, and they will hear the phrase. And once they have heard it, they cannot unhear it. Give them a body of work as vast as the Beatles' catalog, thousands of images and lyrics and album sleeves, and tell them a secret is buried in there somewhere. And of course they will find one. There is no data set that large that does not contain coincidences. The Beatles were uniquely vulnerable to this, for a reason that has nothing to do with what they did wrong. They had made a body of work that people already treated as a text to be decoded. Their records were full of deliberate strangeness, backwards tape, obscure references, surreal cover art, private jokes. The audience had been trained by the band themselves to look for hidden meaning. So when someone said the meaning was a death, the audience already had the skill set. There is one more thing about the Beatles specifically, and it is the part I find most interesting. By 1969, they had spent 3 years actively teaching their audience to look for things. They put a backwards tape on a single and let people find it. They filled Sgt. Pepper's cover with dozens of faces and never fully explained who was there or why. They wrote lyrics that were deliberately opaque and then declined to say what they meant. They put a nonsense phrase at the end of Sgt. Pepper in the run-out groove where a record player would repeat it forever. None of that was sinister. It was a band at the height of its powers being playful with a medium. But the effect was that millions of people had been trained by the Beatles themselves to treat a Beatles record as a puzzle box. The audience had been given the tools, the permission, and the expectation. So when someone finally said the puzzle contained a corpse, there was an enormous, skilled, motivated readership standing by, holding exactly the right equipment. The rumor got so large that Life magazine went to Scotland, found Paul on his farm with his wife and daughter, and put him on the cover in November 1969 under a line that should have ended it. Paul is still with us. It did not end it. It has never ended. Paul McCartney has spent 57 years being asked about it. He has joked about it. He titled a live album Paul is Live and put himself on the cover, crossing the same road, holding a dog on a lead with a number plate reading 51 IS 51 is. He is 83 years old. He is still touring, and there are still people who will tell you sincerely that the man on that stage is not him. Now, the second man. On the 16th of August, 1977, Elvis Presley was found unresponsive at Graceland and pronounced dead that afternoon. He was 42. Almost immediately people refused it. And notice how quickly the template appears. Within weeks, the sightings began. A man at an airport, a man at a petrol station, a man in a diner. Then the clues. The Believers pointed to his gravestone, where his middle name is spelled with 2 A's, Aaron, while other documents used one. They pointed to John Burroughs, an alias he had genuinely used for years to travel and check into hotels, and read it as the identity he escaped into. They pointed to a figure in the background of a film released afterwards who looked, in a low-resolution frame, like him. The mechanism is identical to 1969, a vast public archive, a death that felt impossible, and an audience willing to sift the archive for confirmation. But Elvis adds something the Beatles theory did not have, and it is the emotional core of this entire subject. Elvis did not die gloriously. He died at 42, unwell, exhausted, a long way from the man on the 1956 television broadcasts. And there is something almost unbearable in that for people who loved him. The theory that he faked it is not really an accusation. Read what believers actually write, and it is closer to a wish. He escaped. He got out from under it. Somewhere he is fishing, and nobody knows who he is, and he is finally left alone. That is not a claim about evidence. That is grief wearing the costume of an argument, which brings us to the third man and the version that is still growing. Tupac Shakur was shot in Las Vegas on the 7th of September, 1996. He died 6 days later. He was 25 years old. Almost 30 years on, the belief that he survived is arguably stronger than either of the other two, and it is the only one of the three that keeps recruiting new believers who were not alive when it happened. The clues follow the template exactly. He had adopted the name Machiavelli, a reference to Niccolo Machiavelli, a writer who, believers point out, discussed the strategy of faking one's own death to deceive enemies. Albums kept arriving after he was gone, one of them within weeks, full of lines that could be read as messages. His murder has never been solved, which leaves a permanent open door, and there are photographs, always blurry, always at a distance. The mundane explanations are all available. Machiavelli was a name he had used before the shooting, and it fitted his politics and his reading. The posthumous albums exist because he recorded at an extraordinary rate and left a large vault of unreleased material, which is documented, not disputed. And a blurry photograph of a man who resembles someone is a blurry photograph. But look at what Tupac has that the others do not, and you can see why his version is the most durable of the three. He was 25, he was killed, not lost to illness. The killing was never solved, so there is never a moment of official closure, and he left behind a body of unreleased work so large that new material genuinely did keep appearing for years, which is exactly what it would look like if someone were still working. Every condition that makes a resurrection theory grow is death satisfied at once. So, 3 men, 3 decades, 3 theories that are all the same theory. Look at what they share because the pattern is almost mechanical. Each one was culturally enormous, not merely famous, but woven into the identity of the people who loved them. Each death was, in some way, hard to accept. Paul's was invented outright. Elvis's was undignified and early. Tupac's was violent and unresolved. Each left an archive so large that it can be searched forever without ever running out of coincidences. And in each case, the believing did not require anything be hidden. It only required that we want. I want to be careful here because there is a version of this video that sneers, and I do not think sneering is right. The people who found the clues on Abbey Road were not stupid. They were doing something humans are extremely good at and cannot easily stop: finding order in noise. The same faculty that lets you recognize a friend's footsteps in a corridor is the faculty that hears a dead man in a backwards tape loop. It is not a defect. It is the cost of the thing that makes us able to function at all. And the wanting underneath it is not ridiculous either. It is one of the more understandable things about us. When someone we have never met dies, we grieve anyway. We have spent years with their voice in our houses. The relationship is real, even though it only ran in one direction. And when it ends, there is nowhere to put that feeling. No funeral we are invited to. No role we are entitled to play. So some people put it into a theory. A theory is a place where the person is not dead yet. It is somewhere for the grief to go. And there is a second thing a theory does, which is quieter and I think more powerful. It gives you a job. Grief is unbearable partly because there is nothing to do with it. But a conspiracy theory hands you a task. There are photographs to compare. There are recordings to slow down. There is a community online who will take your findings seriously and build on it. You are not a person sitting with a loss. You are an investigator working on something that matters with colleagues. That is a far more comfortable place to stand, and it explains something that otherwise makes no sense. Why these theories are so often held with real warmth rather than real suspicion. Almost nobody who believes Elvis survived is angry about it. They are delighted. They want it to be true. The theory is not a grievance. It is a hope with a filing system, which is also why evidence does not dislodge it. You cannot disprove somebody out of a feeling. Life magazine put Paul on the cover in 1969, and it changed nothing because the people who needed him alive were not, in the end, making a factual claim at all. That is what all three of these are, underneath the number plates and the backwards tapes. Not investigations, refusals. Which brings me back to a road in Michigan. In October 1969, a young man got into a car late at night because a rumor had made him feel something, and he wanted to talk about it, and he never got there. He was killed by a drunk driver at 80 miles an hour on the way to a radio station to discuss the death of a man who was not dead. There is no lesson in that. It is just an appalling piece of luck, and the presenter who was on air that night carried it for the rest of his life. But it is the only real death in this entire story. Paul McCartney did not die in 1966. Elvis Presley did die in 1977, and Tupac Shakur did die in 1996. And no amount of looking at photographs is going to change either of those. The only person who actually died because of the story is the one nobody tells the story about. If you grew up with one of these theories, or if there is one you half believed longer than you would like to admit, put it in the comments. I genuinely want to know which one got you and how old you were.